So I'm going to share with you our ideas on how India sees its way through the current global situation in order to remain a viable middle power between one status quo hegemon and another aspiring hegemon. Cluster-led growth takes care of the absence of scale in India, because you have thousands and thousands of small and micro enterprises, so you have to create industrial clusters, which Taiwan and Korea have done quite well.
Welcome back, and thanks for joining us for another webinar organized by Princeton worldwide for everybody. Today we will talk about building strategic leverage in the new emerging world order, challenges and opportunities for India. We're very welcoming Anantha Nageswaran. Anantha, good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Anantha is the Chief Economic Advisor to the Government of India, and we will talk about the new world order and India's role in it. But more generally, middle powers have to find their new way in the new world order in a world where there's great power rivalry between the United States and China. And the question is, what's the best response for middle powers? And, they have to cooperate. So one answer is for middle powers to cooperate. And you have to find an arrangement where, this cooperation cannot be torpedoed by the United States or China. So one example is India and EU just finished a trade deal to cooperate with each other much closely. The other challenge is for the others is to resist temptation of opportunism. So that if you have switching back and forth, you have changing alliances, and this leads to a much less stable order. Canada and UK rushed into some strategic partnership with China. We have to see how this will play out, but if everybody is switching back and forth, this might not lead to a more stable world order. Now, we would like to have a world order which is resilient, so resilience is one of the key words, and that also will come in today's setting. In a world which is very different, we had for many, many decades a global hegemony, the United States, which provided a lot of public goods, a lender of last resort, free seaways, and so forth. Now we have to bounce forward to a new world order, and this has to, of course, go beyond open market agreements. So far, everything is about trade agreements, but there are a lot of challenges also in other areas, in particular in finance as well. We can see some instabilities in the finance area evolving, so we have to watch out for this as well. And it would be nice if there would be a shared understanding that in times of stress, there is already prepared, coordinated action to stabilize the markets. So like we did in the fall of 2008, when there was actually a financial crisis evolving, but there were no tariffs going up. Not everybody was looking after themselves. There was the G20 coordinating with each other. And one of the important aspects is also what's the safe asset? What's the reserve asset everybody is flying into? Can it be only gold? Or will it be the US Treasury? Or do we need a network of regional safe assets in order to have something which complements the US Treasury, like the SPs or the GLOSPs, and having safe assets which are spread more symmetrically across the globe. And that this would be a setting which would be more stabilizing, but it should not replace the US Treasury, because it would be very, very disruptive if there would be a radical, quick shift out of the US Treasury. So it should be a smooth transition in a sense. So what are the strategic leverage and dangers? So the old order didn't favor really the global south. So if you just look at the United Nations Security Council, the voting, veto votes, and so forth. And the question is, can we find a new order which is, more symmetric across the globe? And how does India see the US-China power rivalry? Would like to learn. Can India actually benefit from this rivalry? Was the EU deal an answer because, Trump put on the tariffs? Or will we end up in a global disorder after disruptions of the old one? And how can India be resilient in a global disorder? Is India's strategy, how does it think about it? How does it experiment, adapt under large uncertainties? and how to develop counterbalance of choke points and threat points in physical supply chains. I mean, the US is having a forum on resource and geostrategic engagement with Latin America and United Nations. Where does India see its role in this? So there are many, many very, very large, important questions popping up. And the world order is reordering itself, and I can think no one better to put the Indian perspective there than Anantha. So we're looking forward to your explanation and what India's strategy could be in this new world order. Thanks again.
Thank you, Markus. Good morning to everybody in the US East Coast, or good afternoon from other parts of the world. Good evening in India. Thank you, Markus, for having me on your academy to speak here. And thanks also to you for setting the stage very well with your initial slides. So I'll now, and the topic that you had given me on building strategic leverage and so I'm going to share with you our ideas on how India sees its way through the current global situation in order to remain a viable middle power between one status quo hegemon and another aspiring hegemon. The word Swadeshi in the Indian context is an Indian word which means sort of self-reliant or indigenized production system. So how do we move from indigenization? Because India is no stranger to the focus on indigenization, which between 1950 and 1980, India pursued that very vigorously, but with very low success. But now, how do we do it differently, such a way that we are able to become strategically resilient and also use that as a springboard to become strategically indispensable, which is what will give India a leverage as a middle power, so that the hegemons know that they can't exactly treat a country of this size with sort of in a light manner. So that is the goal that India is pursuing on its journey to 100 years of independence by 2047. China saw its imports rise concomitantly with its income growth, and therefore a country like India, which is going from $2,700 per capita income roughly to multiples of that in the next 5 to 15 years or so, will also see its imports rise, and on top of that has to provide for the strategic buffer stock of essential commodities and other resources. So there are only two ways to pay for it as a country. We will see continued trade deficits notwithstanding the ongoing trade surplus in services. So you have to pay for it with exports and or capital import, both of which will be quite challenging in the kind of world that we are going to encounter in the next 25 years or so.
But do you plan to have diversification, or do you plan to have buffer stocks as a main resilience response, or also diversifying across many, many partners, just in case you can, if one partner blackmails you, can switch to another one?
I don't know whether, ideally speaking, we need to have multiple partners, because the single partner dependence obviously countries have noticed, whether it is chip or magnets or critical minerals or rare earths, is exposing them to vulnerabilities and sudden disruptions. So it's important to have buffer stock and to have diversified sources. But I think that is where we also have to be mindful of the global sanctions regimes as well. Otherwise, the financial system will come under strain if it is subject to sanctions. So it is going to be, as with many things, an important tightrope walking.
Okay, thanks.
So on this slide, what I'm showing here is that the phenomena of steadily rising imports, and then last couple of years we have noticed in the case of India, particularly since the US administration imposed reciprocal tariff of 25% and a penal tariff of 25% on India for buying Russian crude in August, there has been a challenge with capital inflows, whether it is portfolio flows or direct investment flows. To be very clear, direct investment flows at the gross level have been increasing, but equally there have been repatriations because of profit taking on past investments. Portfolio flows were affected by considerations of valuation. India doesn't really have an AI play. And then this whole, the penal tariff plus reciprocal tariff adding up to 50% put India at a very high tariff bracket vis-a-vis the United States, and therefore the idea of China plus one suddenly morphed into a question of should there be an India plus one approach even for Indian manufacturers. So we saw basically a big increase in the Indian outbound investment by Indian businesses locating in low tariff jurisdictions or in the United States itself to be able to sell into the US market. So the result of all of that is a weakness in the Indian rupee in 2025. Although, putting it in the context, since the millennium, Indian rupee has actually been one of the better performers among the current account deficit countries in the emerging market space, and even post-COVID, it hasn't really been an outlier. But nonetheless, I think the tariff rate of 50% had it continued would have imposed an idiosyncratic risk on India on top of whatever global risks that arise in the course of 2026 due to geopolitical and geo-economic developments. Next.
Well, if you look at India plus one, was it mostly Vietnam, like for China, or which countries were the investments going out of India?
Sure, I think most countries were probably looking at Vietnam or Mexico closer to the United States or in the United States itself. I think what we have also written in the most recently published economic survey is that, interestingly, and I mean it's self-evident if you look at it closely, if you look at post-Bretton Woods era of the last 52 years, the countries that which are known for strong and stable currencies actually have a sizable manufacturing presence or known for manufacturing. Whether it is pre-Euro days, Germany, and then Switzerland, maybe the Netherlands, etc. And even the US and UK, before they turned into trade deficit and current account deficit countries, they were known for their manufacturing in the 50s, 60s, or during the World War II, etc. So you have in the post-war and post-73 era, 1973, in the floating exchange rate regime era, you had Switzerland, Germany. Here in Asia, you had Japan, Korea, Taiwan, and Singapore. And then lately China. So these countries, which are otherwise known for strong and stable currencies, had one thing going in common: they were also known for manufactured goods. So unless you have a certain manufacturing presence, then your cost of capital is higher because it reflects an exchange rate depreciation risk premium, and one doesn't get associated with a strong and stable currency, and one is always known for currency depreciation because the Indian rupee in the last 30-40 years has depreciated at a rate of about 3% per annum, which is roughly the inflation differential with the United States. So, getting to be known as a manufacturing powerhouse is important, not only from the point of view of creating employment, because all of us know that India became well known for services sector, sort of a precocious late industrializer, and therefore we jumped the manufacturing phase and went straight from agriculture to services sector strength in the last 30 years, information technology in particular. But I think although it has become more challenging now to become a manufacturing player in the presence of a formidable competition from China, it is an imperative, both from a strategic point of view and from having sort of avoiding the self-fulfilling expectations of currency weakness on a regular basis. Manufacturing matters.
But could it also be
slide.
Both manufacturing and services, given that we're not in the 70s where manufacturing was the most important? Now it's probably half, or for the currency implications.
No, I'm not discounting the importance of services at all, given that services has been the mainstay of Indian exports and employment and growth in general in the last 30 years or so. But services sector strength alone hasn't given India the kind of competitive cost of capital and currency stability that we strive for. So I think there is a certain natural momentum to service sector growth in India because of the so-called muscle memory of the last 3 decades. But it is manufacturing, which is why the government came up with multiple schemes since 2014 when they came into office. And there is a national manufacturing mission which was announced in the budget last year, because India's financial year runs from April to March. So hopefully in the course of this April 2026 onwards, that manufacturing mission will become a reality, and we can raise the share of manufacturing in the GDP from the current 17% in constant price terms towards the aspirational goal of 25% of gross value added, GVA, in the economy. So how do we get to that kind of manufacturing capability, which gives us not only low cost of capital, stable currency, external stability, but also in the fragmented world, a certain sense of resilience, because you can't expect the market. That's why, in fact, you must have heard about it. We say we are moving from a just-in-time inventory situation, which we enjoyed in the last 30 years, to a just-in-case world, from just-in-time to just-in-case. And therefore, that requires indigenization. But the problem is, we did indigenization or import substitution in the past by giving protection to our industry without exposing them to competition. A lot of people have contrasted the approach of China with other countries. China subjects its firms to ruthless internal competition, and then they emerge very strongly, which is exactly what the East Asian playbook was, starting from Japan, well captured by Joe Studwell's book, How Asia Works. But we, I think, have to do that. We have to take a leaf from the playbook of East Asia, including China, that if we are going to allow Indian firms to indigenize in certain areas where we need India to produce them locally, we need to hold them to a standard of global competitiveness. That is what we call it intelligent import substitution. And then from there on, then it is possible for us to become strategically resilient. Once you establish that base and then simultaneously pursue foreign direct investment and trade agreements, as we have done with the European Union and with the United States and many other countries like UAE, Australia, the UK, Oman, New Zealand, and investment agreement with EFTA countries, then we will be able to move on to the next stage of having the production base to become strategically indispensable. But given the global environment, we may not have sufficient time to pursue them sequentially. We have to pursue them perhaps in cases in parallel. So on the right side, what you see is that we are describing these three phases as: first, can we make it at home competitively, which is about intelligent import substitution, and then moving on to, can we keep functioning if the world breaks down, which is resilience. And the third thing is, can the world keep functioning if we break down, which is what will give us the position of indispensability, not to be trifled with. So that is the evolution that we are looking at over the next 25 years.
Is this, in this instance, dispensability, is it very, very important across all industries, or is it just for particular industries? If you get some threat in one industry, you can fire back, essentially?
I think it will be ambitious to pursue them in all industries, and that will also be not feasible. Other countries will look at it as a sort of you don't want to become, then other countries will view that with suspicion, whether you are trying to weaponize manufacturing. But it could be even in agricultural products, because agricultural productivity, if we are able to do well, given climate change, even be able to produce climate-resistant crops and feed the world, gives us certain indispensability. So it need not necessarily be in all areas. It need not necessarily be high-tech either. Mm-hmm. So we need to therefore do this in the areas where we have a certain natural strength and advantage and pursue them. And as a large country which also still has a huge social welfare commitment to a population, resource constraint is something we can't take lightly either. So it can't be in all areas.
So it could be genetic pharmaceuticals,
Yeah, I'm actually coming to that in the coming slides. You can see where I'm heading to with this. It will come in the next 2-3 slides that we have a sort of a 2x2 matrix there. But the reason why import substitution matters is quite clear. I mean, I think it is not something new that I'm sharing here. The nature of the global system has changed. Trade is no longer reciprocal and markets are no longer neutral. And supply chains, whether we like it or not, have become instruments of state power. Of course, the world goes through these things in cycles. So we had the best period of globalization before the First World War, and then it took 30 years before we got to some sort of stability post World War II, and then it was since 1980s we globalized. So these things go and come in 30, 40 year cycles. So now it's sort of a restricted trade and selective partnership based trade is what we are getting into. And on the right side, we have given reasons why we feel that one has to indigenize because of various reasons, whether it is export licensing, tariff, or carbon border adjustment taxes, advanced chip making equipment. So there are multiple reasons why one has to indigenize. And as I mentioned earlier, we started seeing it even from the COVID times onwards in PPE materials.
There's new results showing that if you have a lot of import substitution and protection of the home industry, the corporate governance of the leading firms in India is not developing, is not working well. So it is actually important to have some foreign competition in order to fix your own corporate governance.
Absolutely, Markus. I think that's a valid point. That's why I said we need to do the import substitution bit intelligently, because we can't go back to the tried and tested and failed policy that we had before the 1980s, when we did import substitution without imposing any asks on the part of the industry in terms of competitiveness, quality, etc. So that is clearly point well taken. But the task is not easy. We are under no illusions, even, for example, to be able to reduce our import dependence on crude oil or imported energy. And since India has abundant sunshine, if you want to increase the share of solar power, which we are doing, by the way, but the point remains that the process itself is hugely energy intensive. The amount of material required on the left, you see silver, polysilicon, aluminium, the quantities are given to generate 1 gigawatt of solar power, which in turn requires so much of energy to be generated, whether it is in India or elsewhere we import from globally, then it creates so much of energy consumption. And same is the case with wind power. And then there is also the question of where do we source this material from. Right now in the entire production system of a solar power, whether the wafers, the modules, and the polysilicon, etc., and the panels, India is better than what it was 3 years ago in terms of domestic capacity, but bulk of it is still imported from China. So there is a dependence vulnerability that is there, both with respect to solar and wind. So we can't go from one form of import dependence to another form of import dependence. So these are all the key considerations that we are weighing and factoring in as we move towards strategic resilience.
So the question is a little bit, so there's some debate also in the European Union and all this. If China is highly subsidizing solar panels, shouldn't you just take advantage of the subsidized solar panels rather than developing your own solar industry? Or do you want to develop your own solar industry?
That's a fair question, but in the kind of world we anticipate over the next 20-25 years, it also increases your vulnerability, and you are opening yourself to sudden disruptions, and you have to factor the cost of that into your calculations. Then I'm not sure then imported dependence is actually cost competitive. So how do we model that, the probability of sudden disruption and stoppage? But as in the case of magnets or something like that, even in fact, I would go to the extent of saying, if you are dependent on MS Office, these days Microsoft Office products are in the cloud, and you pay an annual subscription. You don't buy the software and download it and install it in your computer. So even that can be weaponized.
But would you allow Chinese FDI in to develop a solar industry in India, or would you say it has to be homegrown and owned?
So there is this active conversation within the country about which are the areas in which where it might be feasible, where it might be desirable, and where it might be one has to be selective, etc., where one would require a joint venture partner. There is this active conversation going on within the country, because post what happened in April 2020 in Galwan, up in the Himalayas, when both armies clashed, there has been a lot of caution on the part of the Indian policy makers. So there is this trade-off issue there. Is between importing, because India's imports from China have gone up despite that confrontation back in 2020. So which form of dependence is relatively easier to manage? Investment versus imports. That conversation is very active inside the country. This is exactly what Markus, you were raising earlier, that if you do import substitution, governance considerations and quality are important, and that we are very explicit that no protection in perpetuity and no protection without reciprocal commitments on the part of the industry in terms of cost competitiveness, quality, export quality, etc. So that is something we have to keep drilling into it, and the Indian industry also has to get used to it, because it is very used to a large stable market inside the country and hasn't really been. That is why India's services sector exports are fast catching up despite a 40-year lead that manufactured goods have. Services which have just come up in the last 30 years may appear to be ready to overtake manufactured goods as the largest export contributor. But lately, of course, the export of smartphones and electronic items in general has really grown quite impressively, which is what helped India to handle the impact of the reciprocal tariff and the penal tariff last year. But nonetheless, I think this emphasis on protection in return for export performance and productivity is the key. So that is what we emphasize going forward. Thank you. So you were asking earlier, which ones do we which areas we concentrate? So this 2x2 matrix, which is very simply put, a desirability versus feasibility matrix. So on the top left is high feasible but highly urgent and important. You do have to indigenize them. Need not be high tech, it could be low tech as well. It could be agricultural commodities, health products. And on the right top, you have feasibility isn't that great, but it's highly urgent, in which case you have to make public investments. And then on the bottom left, you have highly feasible but not very urgent. You can get the technology from other sources, you can diversify. And at the same time, on the bottom right, which is low, medium feasibility and low, medium urgency, you can leave it to market forces. But government basically builds the ecosystem and the talent formation and leave it to market forces to take care of it. So this is the so the top row is non-negotiable and strategic core. Policy has to be extremely active. In the bottom left, it has to be selective. So this is kind of a rough roadmap which we have provided also in the economic survey as to how do we go about it between building domestic capability.
Where like medicine and pharmaceutical would fit in the top left?
Yeah, you have active pharma ingredients on the top left.
Oh, okay.
APIs. Yeah.
Oh, the APIs. Okay.
Yeah,
and then services, you are not put in this 2x2 matrix?
I suppose services, there aren't global dependence as much as in the case of some of these in these ingredients, because we import a lot of pharma intermediate and primary goods actually, particularly from China. So services, of course, you can talk about financial sector. I mean,
yes.
So do countries have to have their own global bank? Because at the end of the day, but even if we build one, as long as we use global reserve currencies, then you are going to remain vulnerable in any case. And that is why we even discussed the example of software products. If you are dependent on cloud, which is hosted elsewhere, then you are vulnerable. So I agree with you. Because the emphasis on manufacturing, I suppose the same kind of thought process will help with the services side as well. I agree with you, Markus.
So will you talk about stable coins, and is this a debate, CBDCs as well, in terms of the strategic positioning of India in a new world order, and PayTM and China dependency in the payment system?
No, payment system, India actually has a fairly independent payment system, domestically at least. And of course, internationally, we all use the dollar quite extensively for for the kind of imports that India engages in. So that vulnerability will always be there, and that is true for many countries around the world. But you spoke particularly about stable coins, and that's a fair point. And the Reserve Bank of India is very clear that it could be the case of a sort of a small yard and a high fence kind of situation we may have to create when the US dollar stable coins become a reality in the United States. There are risks of capital flight. I mean, at the end of the day, you can transfer the money through a use of a smartphone, and the central bank may not be able to monitor it. And as a capital importing country, if you have to deal with capital flight as well, then that becomes even more difficult and challenging to manage the currency. So you're absolutely right. That conversation is going on internally, but how do we handle it is something that will come into view when we have a timeline of when this is going to become a reality in the United States as well.
Is this mostly decided at the Reserve Bank of India or in the Finance Ministry? This stablecoin issue?
It's mostly Reserve Bank of India, but in consultation with the political executive in Delhi. Yeah.
Okay.
So at the same time, I think whether it is services or manufacturing, we are very clear that the government of India has to do what it has to do, which is deregulate the economy. And I think the economic survey talks about it in chapter 16, what we have been doing. There is a lot of enthusiasm at the moment in the country, both in the union government and in the state governments, in provinces states as we call them, to deregulate and remove the burden of economic activity especially for small, medium, and even micro enterprises. This whole of government approach is also equally important. I think that is why we create these mission mode projects: a manufacturing mission, edible oil mission, this rare earths mission, etc. Because multiple ministries have to come together, and a functional organizational structure which works reasonably well in stable times doesn't lend itself to faster decision making. So you need ad hoc or innovative organizational structures as well to cope with the rapidly evolving situation. Cluster-led growth takes care of the absence of scale in India, because you have thousands and thousands of small and micro enterprises, so you have to create industrial clusters, which Taiwan and Korea have done quite well. Even India has done quite well in automobile space, for example, but we need to do that in other areas, especially in labor-intensive sectors as well, like footwear, textiles, etc.
Do you provide some digital platforms?
Input costs.
Does the government promote digital platforms to foster clusters further, or is this something which has to come from the private side?
No, I think the government does create the infrastructure and the logistics to enable the development of industrial clusters. The government does play an active part here. And it has happened in multiple parts of the country, in the north and in the south, for specific sectors, particularly auto components, automobile themselves, and there is a textile cluster in the south. So it is fairly active government promotion that works. Input cost reduction is sort of an important item, because we have been in general, and this is something the government has been addressing. We have had high input cost, power, and also inverted duty structure, where primary goods and raw materials and intermediate goods face higher customs duty than the finished goods. So that makes the whole idea of indigenization that much more difficult. So there has been a concerted attempt in the last 2 years to remove these duty inversion. And then this cross-subsidization of agriculture and households by the industry, whether it is in power tariff, industry pays more, whereas in Vietnam, for example, industry pays less than households. So we are working on that, and there is a new power sector amendment bill which promises to end this cross-subsidization. And similarly, for example, in railway traffic, the goods traffic subsidizes passenger fares in railways. So this kinds of cross-subsidization raises the manufacturing cost for industry, apart from regulations. So these are all the focus areas for the government, and the last 2 years we have moved the needle quite a bit in these areas. And then we have to provide infrastructure.
it's probably politically not very easy to push this through because it also has a redistributive aspect to it to some extent.
No, absolutely. Yes and no, but this is where slowly consensus is building, and states are also finding it that it contributes to better fiscal situation for them if they are able to do this. Because user cost recovery from users is now becoming becoming politically acceptable and also inevitable, given the fiscal challenges the current arrangement poses. So we probably have crossed the inflection point where it becomes politically also feasible. In terms of infrastructure provision, the government of India has been spending a lot of capital expenditure from its budget in the last 6 years. The capital expenditure by the government at Delhi has grown by nearly 4 times. For the new financial year, we are going to spend 12.2 trillion rupees on infrastructure and capital expenditure by the government. It has also improved the quality of expenditure in the government of India. During COVID, the fiscal deficit was 9.2% of GDP, union government alone, the federal government. But we promised that we will bring it down by half, and the year ending March 26 in 1 month's time, we will have achieved that 4.4% of GDP, the fiscal deficit. And we have also done it simultaneously by increasing capital expenditure and bringing down the proportion of revenue expenditure, which is recurring expenditure in the government. So that is the reason why last year in 2025 we got 3 credit rating upgrades. We moved from BBB minus to BBB with S&P, and then from Japan R&I we moved from BBB to BBB plus, Morningstar, DBRS from the US, etc. That happened, but we have to do more work on building the talent ecosystem, employability of Indian graduates, and we spoke about productivity and export performance linked protection and for specified time periods. The important thing is right now what is happening with both states and the union government is to change the mindset of the bureaucracy to replacing a sort of an extraction mindset with a development-oriented mindset. So that is something that is obviously more difficult. Entrenched habits are hard to change, but that is what we are working on, and the government of India and union and the state governments are figuring out ways to sort of change the bureaucracy into a responsive one. And if you're able, especially at the lower levels where they are in touch with the small businesses and the common people, that's a big challenge.
Are there any plans to introduce some apprenticeship programs like in Germany, or is this something the government is looking into?
Yeah, that is something we have to learn from Germany. Yeah. Yeah, and apprenticeship program was introduced in the budget last year, but the Indian companies also have been slow to take it up. And post-COVID, there has been a mindset shift in the attitude of the youth as well. They want the flexibility to be able to take multiple jobs and earn. Yes. So in India, I think the apprenticeship program also needs to overcome some behavioral barriers. So when we talk of entrepreneurial mindset in the bureaucracy, I'm not talking about the government's running businesses, but I'm talking about the risk-taking policy approach, a sort of a get things done mindset. And that was the case. There is a general perception, which is a wrong one, that the software industry in India, the services sector, success story happened because the government wasn't active, which is not true at all. This wonderful case study from Stanford points out how much the government did, and that is in the bottom box you can see. The government recognized software as an industry which opened up financing from the banking system, eased foreign exchange and import restrictions on specific equipment, computers, etc., invested in technical education, and also opened up satellite communication to be able to uplink and work with the US and Europeans in different time zones. Created technology parks with logistics support, and exercise regulatory flexibility. In fact, the case study has a very beautiful statement by the Secretary for Electronics Department in the Government of India in the 1980s saying, he's quoted in the paper saying, we broke as many rules as we created new rules. He says that in that paper. So that's exactly what we mean by the entrepreneurial mindset.
So do you think bringing the new technology in helps to change the mindset in the government itself, among the officials, because you mix
Absolutely.
essentially
And we are
private
seeing
public partnerships. Yeah. Sorry.
no, that's very true. That's very true. So that is the kind of public-private partnership where we need to see what happened in the Indian software sector to be replicated in the manufacturing space in the coming years.
So do you digitize everything? Can you have a driver's license on your iPhone or a smartphone? Is this coming in India too, or movements like this, or?
I'm not sure about driver's license, but many other things like, we have this DigiLocker concept where your entire your credentials, your degree certificates, your national identity card, everything can be on your phone.
Okay.
Yeah. So in many areas it has happened. Yeah. In fact, I don't have to necessarily go back to 1980s and talk about how the bureaucracy helped the software sector to emerge. In the last 1 year or so, I'm sharing here some of the important reforms that the union government has undertaken. On the left side, you start with the income tax system simplification, which is going to be effective starting April this year. The goods and services tax went through a major revamp last year in September. And product certification rules, rural employment reforms focusing on job guarantees that happened towards the end of 2025. It also plugged public money leakages in the system, and implementation of a unified labor code to make it a fairer system between employer and employees, both lowering regulatory burdens at the same time ensuring minimum wages and protection, employee protection also. So it's both a welfare enhancement measure for workers and a deregulatory measure from the point of view of employers as well. And infrastructure procurement reform from a low-cost basis as the bidding criteria to qualification and experience as the criteria for public procurement. And then on the right side, national export promotion to geographical diversification, signing of free trade agreements, deregulation on the part of states, which is a very important program, and we have written about it in the economic survey in chapter 16 part 2, and environmental rules which were very onerous for a country of our per capita income size. It is now proportional to the level of pollution that the industry creates. And insurance, nuclear, defense, space, drone sectors, all of them have been open to private sector and foreign investment. And there are new research innovation funds for technology and industry, with the government committing money out of the budgetary resources, 1.5 trillion rupees over 5 years. And that is like an initial equity. Then the private sector can top it up and show its commitment as well. So multiple reforms efforts have been underway, all of them contributing towards this idea of resilience and ease of doing business and enabling a manufacturing ecosystem that you pointed out, Markus, as in Germany, etc. We need to build that. So that is these reforms are directed towards that.
So let me ask you didn't mention an AI strategy. Is this not a big component? And you have to figure out where's the value added, where the profits are. Is it more in the foundation models, more in the applications? Does India have a way to protect its data in order to get the profit making on the application of the AI? Can you also do your tax return with an artificial intelligence agent? Things like that. Is there an overall AI strategy in India or not?
No, there is an AI strategy. There's an national AI mission as well. In the interest of time and focusing on the strategic dimension, of course, I didn't bring it into the deck of slides here, but we have a special chapter in the economic survey for those interested on AI alone in the economic survey. Okay. So you can see all the developments both on the compute, privacy, on the data security and data privacy, regulatory architecture, and on preparing the population and the institutions, creation of national centers of excellence in AI, particularly application oriented in healthcare and education, because AI can make up for the shortage of skilled personnel, whether it is paramedical, nursing, radiology, and teachers availability in remote areas. In all these areas, AI can play a big role. You asked about, are you able to file a tax return with your AI? I think the tax revenue collection department is using AI quite a bit to boost the tax share of GDP. But the public being able to use AI to fill its tax return, I think we are not yet there, as far as I know.
But are you also building data centers, which are very energy hungry, which is a scarce commodity in India? Or is this, you don't plan to have data centers in India? Or is...
No, that's another trade-off. In fact, in the current budget, we announced a tax holiday for data centers to be established in India, serving global markets. So we are encouraging data centers because it does contribute to certain leverage as well. But you're absolutely right about the trade-off vis-a-vis power and water. So we have to make them sort of, we have to encourage them to set up their own captive sources of power. And also to be able to recycle water, etc. So the policy architecture for data center is evolving in the form of learning by doing.
Okay, thanks.
And I spoke about the state level deregulation. Again, in the economic survey, we write about it in the last chapter. We identified 23 areas where states can deregulate, and multiplied across 28 states and 8 union territories, 828 parameters, therefore, across the states and across what we call union territories, small provinces. So if you look at this bottom circles, you can see 86% of them have been implemented or under implementation. Only 14% of them were not applicable or not implementable. So there is a huge appetite in the Indian states to deregulate and bring down the cost of doing business, especially for small and medium enterprises. And I keep stressing that because if you look at all the industrialized nations, Germany, Switzerland, Japan, China, Korea, etc., you needed to have that Mittelstand, as you say in Germany. And India has had that absence of it over the last 60, 70 years. And these efforts are meant to facilitate the emergence of the Mittelstand in India. Okay. And without that, you can't get global value chains, you can't create a supply side ecosystem in the country, and that is why this is equally an important effort. But what is enthusiastic and energetic is how well the states are responding to this initiative.
Is the emphasis more on harmonization across the states, or do you allow a lot of experimentations in individual states and learn from each other?
Absolutely. It is more the latter. States are free to choose what suits them and then learning from each other rather than harmonization. This is something which we spoke about, Markus, earlier, about the private sector. And in fact, we say that you are talking about governance if there is protection. And this is clearly, this slide says that other countries did not get to where they were without the private sector pulling its weight, so to speak, and therefore accepting the trade-off and looking at national interest. So this is the lesson that Indian private sector also has to absorb from the global experience, and that is what, so although much of the work has to happen on the side of the states in terms of creating infrastructure, light touch regulation, research innovation ecosystem, skilling, all those things have to come from the state side, from the government side as well. But equally importantly, commitment to quality, R&D, innovation, and export orientation, those kinds of quid pro quo has to come from the private sector.
Yes.
And if you're able to sort of succeed in these efforts, and it's not going to be easy in a fragmented world, and also keeping one eye on energy transition as well with its own consequences, if we are able to do this successfully, then we will be able to bridge the power gap, which is negative in the case of India, according to Lowy Institute's Asia Power Gap Study. We are currently at -4, which means we are punching below our weight, given the size of the economy, given the potential, whereas even smaller countries have, like Singapore, Indonesia, etc., have a positive power gap. So I think this kind of reflects the fact that currently where we are, and this is why the focus of the presentation was on manufacturing, services hasn't given us that kind of strategic leverage. And that is why this economic survey and this presentation focused a little too heavily on manufacturing. So we need to build the strategic leverage, and this negative power gap is sort of captures that lack of leverage at this point. And hopefully, if we are able to succeed in what we are doing, then the power gap will close, and that is what gives us strategic indispensability and leverage in the years to come.
But does this survey also include the service sector? You know, if you can switch off somebody's emails account or any software subscription, it's a lot of power you have for others. You don't need to manufacture necessarily, in a sense. No,
I agree with you. We do have a special chapter on services, and that there are home. Ultimately, you're right. Internet, or we spoke about even the suite of MS Office products, which are we have a homegrown software office suite of software products in India. So we don't, and they are in the stage of development. So whether it is cyber security, whether it is your email, whether it is your email server or email client or MS Office, etc., in all these areas we are dependent on foreign providers. And it happened in the case of one of the energy companies in India, Nayara Energy, where Microsoft turned off its the email client and other services. So you are absolutely right. The economic survey has a special chapter on services as well.
So let me ask you something. If there's emphasis on resilience and also on power elements, of course it doesn't come for free. Have you ever done some calculations by focusing on the power element? How much will you suffer in economic growth? Because we can't just, if we still had the old world with a rule-driven multilateral system, would the economic growth be much more higher? Can one quantify this?
Good question, Markus. We need to look at this scenario or counterfactual exercises. Not easy because we have taken the world as it is rather than what we would like it to be. So, so from that perspective,
friendly nations, you probably say, I don't need a power relationship with these friendly nations, so I can save a little bit on this. For these unfriendly nations, I have to be very power focused. So you zoom in on certain industries and
you are right, but I'm unfortunately or fortunately I'm more of a realist. So so that is why we kind of 3 years ago we said in the current state of the world our potential growth was 6.5%. That's what we wrote in the economic survey 3 years ago. But in this survey edition we actually upgraded the number to 7%. Because of our confidence that the government, both in Delhi and in the states, have been moving towards a more deregulated atmosphere and doing all these labor markets, product markets, land reforms, deregulation, etc. So we felt confident enough, and also the huge investments in supply side infrastructure. So we felt confident enough to upgrade our growth potential to 7%, even accounting for the difficult global environment. So how much we would have been able to grow, perhaps the comparison, the reference point comes to us not from a modeling exercise, but from the experience in the first decade of the millennium between 2003 and 2008, when the world was completely open both to capital and trade flows. And India attracted a lot of capital flows in those 5-6 years before the global financial crisis. The growth rate was between 8 and 9% per annum in real terms. So that kind of gives you what might have been or what could be possible in a different world.
Yes.
Next. So the power equation is productive force, institutional quality, and strategic concentration. I think what we are working on right now is on all three dimensions: production, manufacturing, skill, population. Institutional quality is about state capacity, which is again one of the topics covered in the economic survey in chapter 16. And strategic concentration, we went through the 2x2 matrix, which areas we focus on in immediately and in what time horizon. And that is the that kind of captures the task in front of the government in India. Next slide.
When you talk about strategic concentration, you mean as a nation.
Yeah.
But sometimes you're very powerful if you have a very competitive arrangement inside the country and not much concentration of certain industries. Is this what you have in mind? Like in China, they have fierce competition of new 100 EV car firms, car producers.
Right.
And that makes them so competitive in the outside as a nation.
So you are right. This is more about strategic concentration as a nation to be able to focus on some areas. And as you said, it requires one of the most important element of encouraging domestic competition so that we could go into developing global strategic concentration. You're absolutely right. It requires local, national competition to be able to achieve strategic concentration internationally.
Yes. It's a little bit like resilience.
And
you have to be, each firm cannot be resilient. You need a lot of churn and turnover at the firm level in order to be resilient at the national level.
absolutely. Thank you for clarifying that. Thank you for pointing out that that is an important ingredient. If you have to achieve national level resilience, you have to accept failures and a sort of a churn in the system. I mean, I'm grateful to you for making that point very clearly, because this has to be at the national level. It can't be at the firm level. Yeah. Thank you, Markus. And I think this is an important one. I mean, from the point of view of what we are doing, the India-EU FTA, which was, of course, two decades in the making, but kind of accelerated since 2022. And we could conclude it with the European Union President and the Commissioner making it as a chief guest of the Republic Day celebrations on the 26th of January, and then they signed the agreement the following day. And pleasantly, 4 or 5 days later, we also have the outline of a trade deal with the United States, which will remove the tariff rates from 50%, bring it down to 18%. And therefore, once again, I would say considerations of China plus one will be back on track. Labor-intensive sectors which felt the heat of the tariff in textiles, gems and jewelry, and fishery and aquaculture products, they all will be able to sort of plan for their future expansion once the trade deal is officially signed, and more details are available in the next few days with the United States.
So will you update your forecast and say we can produce more than 7% growth in 2026, given the new trade deals?
So, yes, we have right now a forecast of 6.8 to 7.2% for the next financial year in real terms, and nominal GDP growth of 10%. But I feel that now I'm confident and comfortable about achieving the upper end of the range, 7.2, and perhaps with the good monsoon, etc., and assuming, of course, the global financial markets don't have a meltdown, which is, of course, possible with private credit, AI bubble, and also volatility in commodities, etc. All those considerations apart, if those things do not change materially badly in the course of the year, we could be looking at 7.2 to 7.4 or 7.5 rather than 6.8 to 7.2 as our real GDP.
How important is the monsoon rain still in India for the GDP numbers? Is agriculture still a big component? So if there's a bad monsoon rain, how much will it shave off the GDP growth rate? Do you have an idea? Is it a big component?
Yeah, it is not a big component, but a sizable component. By the way, the share has been coming down. I mean, the agriculture share of the gross value addition is only about 18% or so. Bulk of it is still services, and then manufacturing and mining make up the rest. The industry make up the rest. So you're talking about 24% for manufacturing and mining, 18% for agriculture, and about 60% for the services sector. So agriculture contributes to rural demand, agriculture contributes to rural employment and sentiment in general, and it also feeds into the manufacturing of goods in the urban India, because rural India's incomes rise, and therefore demand for products made in urban India by rural India will also go up. So it's not so much only about agricultural gross value addition and therefore lower production, but it also means multiplier effects on urban India. And that is the reason why it could have an impact of 0.5% to 0.7% of GDP if you have a poor monsoon.
Can you push you on a negative scenario as well? Let's suppose we have a financial crisis. How would India react? Would it immediately put tariff boundaries up? And how much would India be hit? Have you done any scenario analysis on this potential scenario?
You mean a global financial crisis, you mean?
Yes.
Because Indian banking system per se went through its own crisis last decade, and right now it has actually, touch wood, I don't want to jinx it, it's in a pretty, in the pink of health, as we say. So whatever impact, and more importantly, recently in the last 2 years, 3 years, Indian stock market has become more responsive to domestic flows rather than international money, which used to be the case earlier. So much so that, in fact, already in the course of last 1.5 years, foreign portfolio investors have made a lot of exit. So that also has given a little bit of resilience to the Indian financial system, actually speaking. But I think it's more of the sentiment effect which will have impact on India. Therefore, I will not necessarily put that as a big significant risk. What might happen is, if that leads to sort of more capital restrictions and controls by other countries, and there is a general liquidity, dollar liquidity shortage, etc., those are the kinds of impacts that will have. And during the 2008-9 crisis, India did not suffer a major real GDP impact. So that is sort of a good precedent or a pointer to India's how India might be affected.
The world community worked together. This time around, the world community will not work together, most likely. So this might hit India much more than in 2008, 2009, in a sense.
That's a fair point, Markus. I mean, so the world community worked very hard to restore liquidity, and then ensure swap lines. But India wasn't one of the beneficiaries of swap lines, by the way, at that time. And of course, the global capital flows were still coming into India because emerging markets were still the rage. Because post-crisis, if you recall, emerging currencies strengthened because capital flows resumed again after 2009 to emerging economies. So my concern is more with that. If developed countries impose, just as has happened with trade flows this year, in the last 1.5 years or so, 1 year or so, if capital flows become also nationalized and sort of segregated or segmented, that is when I think we will have challenges as a country that depends on imported capital. Even though our current account deficit is only between 1 to 1.2% of GDP, it still needs to be financed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. Sorry for sidetracking you a little bit.
We're almost there. Yeah. Next slide. Yeah, I think just very quickly I will run through what the economic survey talks about this time, which is the middle column in the pink color, compared to how the previous economic surveys looked at. And by the way, this was not done by us. It was done by a very studious financial market professional. I have given the link at the bottom. He compared the current economic survey, which is the middle column, compared to the previous economic surveys, that why this had a strategic orientation dimension. And we found it as a great sort of a ready reference tool. So we put it here. It's lots of words in this. Sorry about that. I don't want to burden you by explaining each and every single box here. But basically, that's what we have discussed over the last 1 hour. So I won't belabor this slide. Next one. And there is also, more importantly, over the last 3 economic surveys, we have found a good synergy between what the survey writes and what the budget, union budget, which follows the next day, does. So we speak about manufacturing, strategic resilience, and ease of doing business, a trust-based governance system, labor-intensive manufacturing, all the chapters, and then creating employment and skilling in an AI-independent manner, which is what we cover in point number 9 here. All these things which we wrote in the economic survey, in some fashion or the other, or reflected in the union budget that was announced on February 1st. The survey was released on January 29th. The budget followed 3 days later, and the budget had these elements which were the topics of analysis and examination in the economic survey. So we are very gratified that policy does take its cue from the analysis, and there is a follow through as well, which is what I try to bring out in this slide.
Can I ask you about point 6, this nuclear energy? What's India's nuclear strategy? Are they investing in new power plants to get more energy independent? And urine, how do you become dependent on urine then? What's a big picture strategic picture on nuclear?
Yeah.
Can you say 1 minute about it?
Thank you.
Sorry.
So India is basically right now very heavily dependent on thermal power, and that is what needs to change over the years, and it will, and we have a plan to use more diversified sources of energy, renewable. In fact, India has been investing quite heavily in solar and wind, particularly solar, and there is hydro energy as well. Nuclear has been very small share, but our aim is to increase it to anywhere between 7 to 10% of the overall power generation. And so we opened up the nuclear energy sector to the private sector and foreign investment as well last year in the budget, and then it was legislated upon in the course of the year 2025. And in this budget, what the government did was to follow through on that and said any import of capital goods and equipment related to nuclear power generation will be exempt from basic customs duties. So that was the announcement made. So small modular reactors, that is one source of potential import from the United States, etc. So the emphasis is that nuclear energy has to be given a lot of importance compared to the last 20, 30 years, is the thought process at the moment.
What about local resistance, and is it easy to, and how long does it take to build a power plant?
It's again a fair question, but we do have to also, so we have to see how that plays out. However, there is a far better understanding of the relative risks here compared to what it was even 2 decades ago, even among the society. So for example, when the government opened up the nuclear energy sector and announced this, there wasn't any significant resistance to the idea. So sometimes, ideas go through their own cycle, and then at some stage they cross the inflection point. My gut feeling is that nuclear energy has crossed that threshold.
Great, thank you.
And this is how the Indian budgets have evolved over the years. Again, this is more for reference than for elaboration in a slide presentation. How we have focused on infrastructure investments and also human welfare measures such as nutrition, and then for food security and project implementation in 2023. So basically what you're seeing, the line that goes from 1.97 trillion rupees to 11.2 trillion rupees is the amount of public investment in infrastructure. So this is what I said. It's roughly gone up by about
tenfold.
Sorry?
Almost. Or eightfold it's gone up.
No, it's about sixfold.
Okay.
Sixfold over the last 10 years.
Yes.
Yeah, sixfold. And this year, for FY27, as we call it, it's 12.2 trillion rupees.
By the fraction of GDP, how much did GDP go up? That's nominal. These are nominal numbers, no?
Nominal, yes. This is nominal, of course. So GDP is about 300. So next year, for example, the GDP will be about 390 trillion rupees. So 12 is something like 3.2% of GDP.
But did GDP also go up about 6 times during this period? Nominal GDP?
No, GDP, again, I must say, I don't have it off the top of my head, Markus, but I don't think it went up 6x. That's why I think the share of public expenditure in capital expenditure or infrastructure, I think has increased from 1.8% of GDP to 3.2% of GDP in these years. Yeah. So this is the forecast from the IMF, not our forecast, this is the fund's forecast. 7.3% for the year ending March 26, and 6.4% each for the year ending March 27 and March 28. But we have a higher number for year ending March 27. Between April and March, we expect 6.8 to 7.2, and after the trade deals, as we discussed earlier, we are likely to increase it even further to 7.2 to 7.4. 27, 28, we will see how the world is as we go along. But in general, I think post-COVID, one big difference compared to the pre-COVID era has been macro stability, fiscal prudence, and more sustainable non-inflationary growth than we have experienced so far. And that's a testimony to the supply side investments the government has been making, and hopefully, despite increasingly challenging global environment, our hope is that we can continue and sustain this.
So why does the fund think that it goes down from 7.3 to 6.4 and doesn't stay at the 7? Do you have any explanation for that?
So the fund has a trend growth estimate of around 6.5%.
I see, so it goes back
for India, whereas I have upgraded it to 7%. Yeah.
Okay.
We can actually, we are coming close to an hour and 10 minutes. Sorry about that. So I think this slide actually was a very interesting one. I picked it up during COVID, and I think if you look at the bright pink boxes, you have populism, trade war, financial repression, military conflicts, and negative real yields. 3 out of these 5 boxes are already kind of reality, and if anything, this fund manager who posted this on his research publication traces it all the way back to the prolonged use of quantitative easing beyond the immediate liquidity and demand revival needs. It lasted well into a decade, and that is the reason why, and we kind of doubled down on the same policy prescriptions post-COVID as well. So therefore, in some sense, since the seeds were sown in 2008-9 and continued in 2020, we have to accept the fact that these kinds of consequences, which you are seeing in these bright pink boxes, will probably be with us for the next several years or maybe even a decade. They are still playing out, and that is exactly the context in which we are trying to prepare ourselves, developing countries.
But India did fairly well in the last few years, in a sense. It's
absolutely, absolutely. So this is the global environment. The economic policy uncertainty index is as high as it was much more than it was during the pandemic outbreak. And then gold is again back towards $5,000 as we speak. So this kind of signals that obviously focus on strategic resilience is necessary or inevitable, both from a portfolio perspective for individuals and from a national perspective as well.
Do you have an explanation? You know, we have all this uncertainty indices, everything is exploding, gold is exploding, but the global economy is fairly resilient. It's not tanking, it's still doing fairly well. What's your explanation for that? Normally we would have expected, given these indicators, that the economy would tank.
I think in 2003 to 2008 period as well, I think in 2006 we had one warning sign when Mr. Ben Bernanke, talked about talked about tightening monetary policy, and we had a big sell-off in 2006 summer in all risky assets, and then it continued. So while the underlying pressures were building up, for quite some time, we didn't see it manifest either in macro data. Inflation was low, growth was humming, stock markets were booming, etc. So I think there seems to be sort of the, we are more frequently infected by the Wile E. Coyote moments from time to time. So that is what I would attribute it to. Yeah.
Okay.
And I think I'm just capturing the same point that we discussed. Schiller PE is 40x at the moment. Concentration in a few 10 large companies, about 40% of them are, and the private credit, non-banking financial intermediation is now much bigger than banking intermediation, and exemplified in the many circular finance deals we have seen in the AI space. So this is the biggest worry we have now that the trade deals appear to be done, this is the biggest worry we have. Not, of course, the consequences apply not just to India, but to everybody in the world.
How big is non-bank financial intermediations? How big is it in India? So private equity, private debt, is it big, or is it still, it's very bank-dominated financial system in India?
In absolute terms, it is big, but in terms of proportion of the overall financial resources, the banking system is still the most dominant.
Yes.
And banking system is in good health, having gone through its own period of cleansing in the second decade. Yeah. And these are the three scenarios we are tracking for the world. So scenario one is business as in 2025, which is and with slightly higher fragility and volatility, and that is what is playing out. But the scenarios can kind of telescope into each other as we move forward in the course of the year. And easily scenario one can telescope into two, and two can telescope into three. And so this is anybody's guess. So all of us are always on walking on pins and needles anyway in the course of this year. So
yes.
Thank you very much, Markus. I am done with my presentation.
Thank you. I think we went way over time, but it was fascinating to get this perspective from India, and also, you know, how your vision of the global economy will look like, and how India is leveraging its advantage this way. I think it's nice that India has a clear plan ahead. I think it's also important that, I guess, India fits much better in the world community of in terms of finding partners and interact this way. And I think, as you said, with the new trade deal in the United States and the new trade deal with the European Union, it might even look better than scenario one going forward for this year.
That's
but
right.
New hiccups can happen any moment.
Absolutely.
So let me ask you one final question. You outlined this scenario. Can you give me a timeline? You didn't give me a timeline. So you want to with strategic import substitution, then developing resilience, and then having essentially some choke point over others. Is this 50 years, or is this 10 years, or is this 3 years? Going through these phases.
No. We are looking at in the next until about the centenary of Indian independence, so 2047.
Okay. 47.
So
okay.
that's the goal. So this is a 20-year horizon, and we need to build this within this basically 2 decades.
Okay, I see. And there might be revisions of this plan within the next 2 decades. But is it always the case that Indians think 20 years ahead?
No, we used to have 5-year plans.
Yes.
We used to have 5-year plans before. But now, I mean, the Prime Minister has articulated this goal of, aspirational goal of being a developed nation by 2047. So that gives us sort of a good impetus to plan for the next 2 decades.
And I guess part of resilience is that you will adopt the plans as the world is changing, and you learn more. This is not a rigid plan.
That is inevitable.
Yes. So thanks a lot,
That's
and thanks to
inevitable.
all of you participating. I think it was fascinating, and I'm very hopeful that India will grow well and will be a big part of the global community and contribute to economic dynamism across the world. And we stay in touch and hope to talk to you soon, perhaps in Delhi or somewhere else.
Thank you, Markus. Thank you for your wishes, and thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts with you.
Great. I talk to you soon.
Yeah.
Bye-bye to everybody.